It's about that time.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for checking us out on our online presentation of City Views. As always, we want to thank the sponsor of City Views, Coach Insurance Agency, located at 1151 East Main Street in Torrington, Connecticut. There to take care of all of your insurance needs. Just stop by and talk to my main man, Steve Toth, and he'll be more than happy to hook you up. In the meantime, we're continuing on with our What's Cooking segment here on our online series for City Views. And as always, in the house, the one and only Michelle Cook. Good afternoon, my friend.
Good afternoon, my friend. Glad to see you're doing well.
I am feeling very lucky, very blessed, very fortunate. And as always, definitely it's always a blessing to be able to connect with you and talk about the things that are going on in our community.
No, it's a great opportunity. I really appreciate this and being able to have just an open and candid conversation about what's happening from Tuesday to Tuesday.
Well, there's definitely a lot going on now, as everyone is very well aware of with the coronavirus situation. And we've been kind of sticking to this topic in our conversations because of the impact that the virus is having, not only on our local community, but on the whole wide world. So each community is dealing with the effects of the coronavirus in different ways. And we've been discussing some of the ways that you've been able to deal with it, both personally and professionally. So I wanted to come back to this topic and give our viewers any updates or any notifications that you want to bring to their attention at this time.
So, I think that this filming is actually timely, or this catch up is timely. The governor announced today that our schools would not be going back for their regular school year. I know that it's disheartening for some, frustrating, disappointing. You fill in all of the descriptives, and it is going to fall under one of those realms. But I think at the end of the day, the decisions were truly made to keep everybody still safe and have the ability for the social distance requirements that we find that's necessary to combat this COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that we often look at the schools and we say, oh, the kids are strong, they can get through that. But we have to recognize too that not only are the students that are in those buildings, but you have the educators, you have the principals and the administrative staff, you have the nursing and the dietary staff and cafeteria workers, and you also have your teachers, which are the ones that would be on the front line. And so, we have a moral and ethical obligation to keep everybody healthy to the best of our ability. And because we know that this pandemic is still changing each day, we know that there are still symptoms that are new from this week to last week to the week before that. And so with all of the moving parts that we have going on, the governor's office has decided that, with his team, he has a transition team that's working together. So he's not making decisions in a vacuum behind a door. He is truly relying on folks that are out there, that their expertise. And you have a commissioner of education that's responsible for the thousands upon thousands of students and then thousands upon educators, making sure that they're safe too. So, it's not news that anybody is excited to share, but it is news that now helps people plan for those next steps. How do we do graduations for our senior class? When can we schedule those out? And how can we do that in a safe manner? Can we do summer school in a safe manner? We know that we're talking about opening summer camps. Let's try to get kids that really need some extra help into the schools, but in the ability of a lesser population and in a social distance manner. So that's today's news. Whether it makes people happy or sad, it breaks my heart to pass the news. because I do know how excited kids are to go see their friends. They might not always be excited about going to sit in the classroom, but there is truly that social emotional connection. And then you have, those people that have extracurricular activities that are also losing out on that. The CIAC made an announcement subsequently after the governor made the announcement that the spring sports obviously are now canceled too. It's time that you can't get back if you're a senior. And I know that in my house as having a college senior, it's things that you've worked for your whole entire life and you get to this point. And, that's what's heartbreaking. I hope that everybody finds some type of peace knowing that you're not in it alone, that there's thousands of other people out there like you.
Which brings me to my next point, Michelle. Sometimes we have to be very frank in our discussions, and we have to deal with realities that may not be necessarily to our liking, but realities nonetheless that have to be taken into consideration. And some people feel like this is too high a price to pay, that the guidelines that are being implemented are overbearing, even to the point of maybe infringing upon civil rights.
Yeah.
How do you look at those perspectives, and how can you provide them comfort in knowing that the guidelines and the protocols that are being set in place are necessary?
I think that takes it back to home, right? And when we lost my father-in-law April 2nd to the COVID virus, there were protocols in place, but I don't think that those protocols at that point were nearly what they needed to be. I'm a firm believer that we have a moral and ethical obligation and a constitutional obligation to keep your citizens safe. And when you're talking about a global pandemic health crisis, that changes the game. And that is already spelled out in our Constitution about what is and what isn't. Our forefathers, they were the founders of what our Constitution looks like. And it has had some alterations moving forward, but there is an obligation in place that your government has an obligation to protect you. Whether you choose to protect yourself or not, we have to do that. And if you choose not to protect yourself, we have an obligation to protect those that can't protect themselves. And I think that we often lose sight of that when we're talking about these conversations. It's not about whether you choose to wear face coverings or not. It's about the fact that if you don't, you could infect somebody else. And what makes that right? And why is it okay for you to go out and not abide by those rules or those directives and force somebody to stay at home? It does become a very tricky balancing act. And I recognize that, I can't begin to say how many people are on both sides of this fence, right? Oh, we're not taking enough protocols. Maybe we're moving too fast. And then you have those folks 3 weeks ago that said, what in the world are we doing? I can't believe that we're shutting things down. This is way too extreme. To how dare you tell me that I have to wear a face covering to walk into a store? And I often go back to, for many, many years before I was walking around, there was signs that said no shirt, no shoes, no service. And I think that, we might be seeing an addition to that, at least for some time, no mask, no shoot, no shirt, no service. And I don't mean mask, I mean face covering. And, I know that we get kind of hung up on the wordsmithing of things, but I understand that this burdens people in different ways, but let's talk about those folks that are compromised, that this burdens them in a way they can't leave their house. There's some of us that are very blessed that we can still get out and do our own grocery shopping. There are folks that cannot. They can't because there's other folks that aren't taking the necessary precautions. We need to look at it. It's not about me and not about you. but it's about the rest of us. It's about the folks that live down the street from us, or, the elderly complex folks that can't get out. I had a call yesterday saying, could we just get some fresh fruits and vegetables dropped off to our senior housing area because we don't have cars to get out? So I've been on the phone trying to figure out how we can do that. We don't think about those things. But, as I've talked to the fire chief about a variety of different issues, he says, we're all learning together. You plan for certain things, but then you have to learn on the other things. And when you talk about something that's as forever changing, it's not easy. Like, we know what to expect when a hurricane hits or a tornado hits or an earthquake hits. We can plan for those. And those things are pretty standard when it comes to the magnitudes and what the needs are going to be. We are understanding of what a flu epidemic looks like. But we also know that traditionally the flu doesn't require people to be put on ventilators. We recognize that it doesn't put an overburden on our medical professionals, that the contaminants are totally different than this contaminant, of which we still don't understand how contagious it is. The guidelines about how long something lives on a surface is forever changing, whether it can be transmitted through an HVAC system or after somebody passes away, that person that's infected can still pass the virus. This is a different thing altogether. And I would just really hope that as much as we are looking to exercise our rights for protest and constitutional freedoms and all of those things, that we take a step back and we look at the other people that this is affecting.
Well, Michelle, you bring up some great points, but I think that we have to lean forward in how we view not only this virus, but the environment that this virus has created. And it seems as if, correct me if I'm wrong, that there obviously are some lessons that are being learned, but there's still some cracks in the floor that haven't quite been sealed in yet. And on one hand, when you're asking people to make that sacrifice, you have to make sure that they're making that sacrifice anxiety-free.
Agreed.
So I want to hear from you in terms of how effectively you feel you guys have done in responding to this, and what steps going forward that you think you really need to focus on to make sure that you're not only bending the curve from the impact of the virus, but you're also bending the anxiety that a lot of people are feeling because of the virus.
I think that a lot of fear stems from the unknown. And I believe that we have done as good or as great of a job that we have been able to do from the governor all the way down to the local folks, giving transparent, honest, and up-to-date information daily. We're talking about daily press conferences from the governor. The administration from, DC has been doing daily press conferences. I think that information is getting out there. I think that there's still that conflict of information that is given from maybe the federal level to the state level. But I believe that we really have to, and you've heard me say it, and I'm going to continue to say it, it is local. What happens with us in Connecticut or what happens with us right here in Torrington is going to be totally different than what happens in Montana, South Dakota, and Texas. So we have to address and respond to this pandemic in a Connecticut way. And then we have to respond to this epidemic and its crisis in a regional way. We've seen that Fairfield County got hit very hard early on, and we're getting hit harder. We've been hit harder as of late. That's going to change and it's going to move. But I believe that we've done the best that we have the information to give out there. So I think that should lessen some of the angst. I think the problem is we still don't have all of the answers. So as much as I can give you the information that I've been given from Dr. Carter and the governor's office and every commissioner out there, there's still not all of the answers. I think that part of our biggest concern is the limited amount of professional protective equipment that we need, the PPE that everybody hears people talking about. You know, I'm not sure that anybody ever expected this to come up as quick as it did. Shame on us, because we had warning, you know, and that guidance really needed to come from the top down, and that means DC top down. You know, but everybody has a little bit to learn from this. And if each of us in every arena of our individual professions, whether that be a grocery store worker, a restaurant owner, a nursing home director or owner, all the way up to the hospitals and insurance agencies, you fill in the blank. You know, it takes all of those folks to make us a community. And if we all learn what our individual responsibilities are on what we've done right, what we might need to do more of, and then bring that together moving forward, God forbid this pandemic sees us in the fall, we will be much better prepared. I think we've learned from these things. There's much to learn still. But when we talk about anxiety and fear, we have to talk to each other. We have to rely on each other. You know, don't be afraid to pick up the phone and call a friend. You know, maybe throw a rock at your neighbor's window and say, hey, look, I just needed to know you're okay. Pick up the phone. You know, all of these things help us with that social anxiety that we might be having, because four walls get very small after a while. And if you are one of those folks that cannot leave, we've been cooped up now for almost 7.5 weeks in some areas. You know, that's a long time for somebody not to be able to go outside and see a friend or a loved one.
Still leaning forward, what are some of the unintended consequences that can come out of the environment that's been created from the virus? And what things keep you up at night in regards to
excuse me. So unintended consequences of the virus. You know, we've shut businesses down for the fear of people's safety. The unintended consequences are the fact that some of those businesses might be so hard pressed to make their fiscal ends meet, they might not be able to reopen. Unintended consequences, not being overly proactive and just relying on the CDC guidelines for things. I specifically look at the nursing homes and say, what if we would have done more earlier? What if we would have, you know, had enough PPE for all of our direct care staff to be able to be covered from the minute that people were separated from their families, you know, and recognize that CDC guidelines, in my view, should be the minimum standard and not the holy grail of standards. You know, we have the unforeseen consequences of students that are now being forced to learn at a level on a computer that they might not be comfortable with, or maybe because they are not fortunate enough to have internet at home or their own device, that they are now stuck in a learning curve that they didn't ask for or create. You know, there's a variety of different things that we're going to see here. And I also think that we're going to have a lot of emotional ties to this from our healthcare professionals and those folks on the front line that are seeing people die at a rapid rate, especially in areas like Fairfield County and New York. And I don't mean to lessen the folks that have seen people pass away. Right here in our own community, when you have nurses and health aides that are holding the hands of people that they don't know because a loved one can't be with them when they lose their life, that all brings an emotional tie later on that we will have to figure out how to give support to those folks that have really done a job beyond what we can ever understand.
Well, I think at this particular time, not understanding everything that could come from this virus, especially in regards to unintended consequences, once you can identify what those unintended consequences are, What are some of the remedies that you wrestle with in regards to dealing with those outcomes?
You know, I think it's how you hold people accountable. It's the overreaching of a governmental reach, what that balance looks like. It's how we can put extra supports in place to ensure that people that are affected by this pandemic have the supports they need to get through it emotionally, physically, mentally, and otherwise. Um, how do we help businesses get back on their feet that are struggling? You know, I know that we've given opportunities for people that are renters, but we also have landlords that are being affected on another end of that. How do we help them? Um, how do we ensure that, you know, the the health insurance industry doesn't jack up your rates to pay for what they might have been paying for out of pocket? We recognize now that we're going to have, you know, $1 trillion deficit from the federal level, and we'll have $1 billion deficit at the state level. And thank God we did not raid that rainy day fund at the state level. I know that that was something that was put on the plate and proposed, and you know, I'm so thankful that we didn't do that, because we would be in much more of a fiscal crisis than what we currently will be moving forward. Um, I think that we need to learn to listen to people, and I recognize that everybody is absolutely entitled to their own opinion, but we have to recognize that this COVID-19 pandemic is not political. This, it takes no prisoner. I think that when we move forward, we also need to discuss voting. I know that that's been something that's on everybody's mind. Maybe not as much as it would have traditionally have been, but you know, the Secretary of State has made some rulings about doing absentee ballot voting for all. That's very important. We need to get that information out there as well. There's a primary in June, and we have a presidential election and state elections in November. We need to ensure that those folks that truly believe in their core that voting is their obligation, and you know, people have fought and died for their rights to vote, that they take this to heart, that we need to get that information out there as well. We're trying to ensure that we don't leave anything off the table. And so as we're closing this segment, if there are things that people feel we have left off the table, I encourage them to reach out to my office, whether it be email or my phone number is listed and it's still, you know, it still rings in my house, um, Facebook and however else social media wise. We need to hear from people to say, maybe this is what needs to happen next, or maybe this is a different suggestion, because none of us are experts in everything. And we have to rely on those experts in all those fields to make us better and learn from this.
Absolutely. And I think the this situation in my mind, more than anything else, presents a great learning opportunity for the country.
It does.
And I think if we can understand the fact that whether this virus was done on intent or not, um, it puts us in a position where we can really redefine our role in the world. And
I agree. I think that all goes all the way down to our individual roles,
mm-hmm,
then our community roles, then our
mm-hmm,
state roles, and then the
mm-hmm.
like, right? We all have individual obligations, not only to take care of ourselves, to take care of our communities. We need to learn from it.
Well, in a democracy, the individual matters.
Absolutely.
So squaring those parameters in regards to where our individual liberties end and our fellow citizens' liberties begin is where we have to, define those lines. And I think that this situation is making us do that, maybe in a way or before we were ready to do it. But some of these things that are happening, I think, were inevitable in our financial markets, um, in our public health situations, um, in our communities. So if we can keep that mindset that this is a challenge more than it is um, punishment.
I think that you make a good point. And as you're saying all of these things, there's one thing that comes to mind that I think that we often get lost on. And it's what's the positive that has come out of this situation that's been so tragic. And I look around and I see families are home.
Mhm.
People are eating dinner together, watching movies together. They're having family game night, crafting. Folks are crafting like crazy. Whether you're making face coverings or cards to send to folks. I've never seen so many birthday parades in my entire life than I have lately. I'm actually leaving to go to one around 5:30. And there's no age on these parades, I tell you, from the youngest to the oldest. I'm not sure who gets more excitement out of it. And I think that we also need to recognize that we have lost many good people. We see our flags flying at half staff in remembrance of all those that have lost their lives to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I think that it's brought families together as well. And that's a focus I would love for us to see moving forward. We have to address the negatives, and I recognize that. I think that we have an obligation also for the mental health of this to address some of the positives too.
Absolutely. And we're definitely going to be upping our interviews here with our social media segments. And we're going to be talking to people involved in the community who can help shed some light on these issues and bring these discussions to the forefront where we can elaborate on them and develop a more effective way of providing public policy for you and our other representatives. So I want to thank Dan Morrison, who's stepped up to the plate and who's provided So much direction here for us at City Views with our video marketing content. And as well as the rest of the staff, Daniel Yannick, Meg Capon, Catherine Pezzi, Stephanie Barksdale, of course, Doug Harrell at Altice. Hi, Doug. How are you? Hopefully you'll
He
see.
misses us so much.
And definitely want to thank my co-host for the show, Melissa Crofts, and our main man, Weibo. And we definitely want to send Weibo some real nice, warm wishes and blessings to his family as well.
Absolutely.
So we're looking forward to the future here on City Views. And I think that for the most part, we're planning to deliver better content to our audience. And if you have any suggestions on topics, you guys know the routine. We're always open to hear that. So don't hesitate to reach out to us at any time. So once again, we're wishing each and every one of you the very, very best. Stay safe, stay sound, stay hunkered down until it's time to rise again. In the meantime, we'll see you back with more right here on City Views. I'm Jacque Williams. Peace out. City Views, City Views, City